thank you all for attending this program that was made possible by Canvas Funding and Field Building Collaborative. I'm Yona Verwer, founding director of the Jewish Art Salon. The format for today is that Judith Joseph will introduce the panelists, and then Dorit Jordan Dotan will present her summary of the Documenta and her new artwork addressing this issue. There will be a question and answer for Dorit, moderated by Ben Schachter, before we move into the second part, where the panelists and moderator will engage in a roundtable discussion, again followed by questions and answers. At any time, feel free to put comments and questions in the chat. If it is a question, we request that you put in first the word question with capital letters, so it will be easy to see which ones are questions and which ones are comments. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Ben Schachter. Ben is a professor of visual art at St. Vincent College, an artist in residence at its Jewish Studies program. He's exhibited at the Berlin Jewish Museum, the Jerusalem Biennale, the YU Museum, the Institute of Sacred Music at Yale University, and many others. He's also the author of Image, Action, and Idea in Contemporary Jewish Art. Back to Judith.
Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce the three artist panelists that we have for you today. And in addition to these three artists whose work you will see, and one image per artist, I'm going to add a few of other Jewish Art Salon artists into the presentation later, and their work will be identified. So let's take a look. We're going to begin with Chana Elias Wiesenthal, and I'm going to read from her statement that she sent in responding to the call for artists. Growing up in small town America with the last name Wiesenthal, I have encountered both cultural naivete and blatant anti-Semitism. My series, Avert the Gaze, is meant to stir disparate emotions simultaneously, both an attraction and a sudden realization repulsion. It is an amalgamation of my responses to literature, film, histories, personal contact with survivors, and travel to the places where the consequences of anti-Semitism leaves long, dark furrows in the earth. My work is a search for meaning and identity in a world where cultural holocausts have become commonplace. It is made from a desire to restore a full sense of humanity to victims. Our second artist is Dorene Schwartz-Weitz. 44 Degenerate Dam is a painting that reads likened to a discarded newspaper or diary left behind in the ruins of a lost civilization. Its pages track the history of anti-Semitism through biblical foreboding quotes, Hitler's words, images of Mickey Mouse. Dorene was one of the Mouseketeers, pictures of my relatives killed in the Holocaust, and personal effects as a first-generation survivor. Selena Rojhani, we cannot judge or label every piece of art before we display it. Art is meant to stir conversation, strike emotions, and create a memorable experience. While the mural is blatantly anti-Semitic and anti-Israel to me, the artist's point of vision was different and based on their upbringing in a country that was and is rigidly controlled by its military. To me, it was even more meaningful and impactful and became part of the exhibit experience that the Taring Padi piece at Documenta was exhibited to allow for this freedom of expression, which may or may not have been rooted in hate and then removed in front of the spectators. And now Dorit Jordan Dotan, who co-curates and produces this program with me and our team, will present her summary of Documenta and her new piece. She was in Germany and visited Documenta. So Dorit, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, and good evening, everybody. So I'm going to give a summary of Documenta for those who don't know what it is. Some Americans do not. 10 years after the end of World War II, painter and academic professor Arnold Bode worked to bring Germany back into dialogue with the rest of the world and to connect the international art scenes through presentation of 20th century art. He wanted to present art that had been dimmed by the Nazis and degenerate, as well as contemporary works. The first Documenta was a retrospective works for major movements, among them brilliant artists such as Pablo Picasso, Max Ernst, Hans Earp, Matisse, Kandinsky, and Henry Moore, and among them others. The exhibition features 670 works by 148 artists, most of them from Germany, France, and Italy. Held every 5 years, Documenta is now widely considered as one of the art world's most important events. It's happening in Kassel, Germany. Documenta 15, one Grupa, is the Indonesia-based artist collective that has built the foundation of the Documenta 15 on the core values and ideas of lumbung. It means Indonesian term for a communal rice barn. Lumbung, as an artistic and economic model, is rooted in principles such as collectivity, communal, resources sharing, and equal allocation, and is embodied in all parts of the collaborations and the exhibition. For Documenta 15, Rohan Grupa invited community-oriented collectives, organizations, and institutions from around the world to practice lumbung with each other and work on new models of sustainability and collective practices of sharing. A 6-foot mural of many symbols of oppression in Indonesia included characters of pig-faced creature wearing a helmet mask marked Mossad, and a depiction of vampire-like individual with Jewish side blocks with the lettering SS on his bowler hat. Jewish organizations and the media were understandably up in arms. People's Justice, this is the name of this piece, was removed, leaving the central square bare, and both Rohan Grupa and Tering Paddy apologized. Tering Paddy said, "As a mark of respect and with great regret, we covered the relevant work, which is found offensive in this particular context in Germany. The work now became a monument of grief at the impossibility of dialogue at that moment." They said, "We hope that this monument can now be a starting point for a new dialogue," and we're still waiting because there was no dialogue so far. Further accusations followed. Palestinians' artist work is very much in evidence at Documenta 15, while Israeli artists are not visibly represented, amounting to a silent boycott of Israel. One Grupa has denied imposing it, but it hasn't helped. The scandal built until the Documenta's supervisory board fired the nonprofit's director, Sabine Schormann. The presentation of the mural and its removal opened the Pandora's box in the art world, and especially in Germany, where anti-Semitism in any form of expression is forbidden by law. The media mainly focused on this aspect and turned the Documenta into a political debate, discussions about anti-Semitism, the freedom of artistic expression, curatorial decisions, and exclusion based on origin instead of an international art exhibition. The controversial result raises questions of artistic identity and hidden or open propaganda. I visit Documenta during the 3 days of preview for museum personnel and the media. These days, when I was there was a huge construction stood empty in the center of the main square of Documenta. Just after opened to the public, anti-Semitic images were discovered in the 6 feet, which is 12 square meter, mural installed on the construction by Terry Paddy, the group that created the mural. Like wildfire sparked an art storm about anti-Semitism and freedom of expression in Germany. While in Germany, I was exposed to both public and private conversations. I watched the symposium that was held in Documenta with the participation of Adam Shimchik, the artistic director of Documenta 14 in 2017 in Athens, a member of the curatorial collective Ruan Grupa, leaders of the Jewish art community and the academy, and members of the Documenta's committee. I read in the press different opinions from the art field, Jewish organizations, German establishment, BDS supporters, and artists who support freedom of speech and free thinking. I'm an artist, a Jewish, not by choice, an Israeli peace activist, social justice artist, second generation of refugee family, hearing all my life personal stories of anti-Semitism and propaganda. I felt emotionally involved in the event and thus sought to hear different opinions on issues of creative freedom versus propaganda. This work was created out of the ambivalence and at the same time embracing my strong need of artistic freedom to follow the dictates of my conscience. The work created on the Documenta map, the one I used when I was in Kassel at the Documenta, it was the basis of the piece that every day I was adding elements to it. It is made in the style of the Documenta painting and the graphics and the same colors. I use ideas of diverse currents and opinions, borders that cannot be crossed in Germany by law. During my stay in Germany, in the summer of 2022, I was exposed to the conflicts between the German government need for correction and the private feelings of many Germans and others about the waves of immigrants and criticism of Israel. At the time I was there, working at Museum Friedland, which is based at the transit camp of asylum seekers and refugees, I met BDS activists. Once I was exposed as Israeli, I felt that I need to defend myself, maybe go out of the closet as peace activists, being judged by where I was born or being Jewish before being human being, felt excluded, marked as a bad person, perhaps. There's a very, very deep connection between racism and anti-Semitism, and there's a whole history of addressing this question within post-colonial studies. So this piece is the one I created, influenced by how I felt there. I used a photograph and I used markers, and I just ripped some pieces from the catalog, hence, and here it is. Judith.
Dorit, I think your piece is so rich, and I think the fact that you built it upon the map of Documenta makes it all the more authentic and impactful. There's so much imagery in it, and I just want to ask you about one part of your imagery. What's with all the fish? There are fish swimming in all different directions. Tell us about that.
So yeah, so the fish are symbolizing the different opinions of the people. I met people that are from so many groups and reacting to immigrants and reacting actually to Israel occupation and reacting to anti-neo-Nazis in Germany. So I used photographs. Also, one photograph that I took with people that in one side of the photos, they are just sitting on the floor, but, you know, representing the groups that are anti-neo-Nazis, yeah. And on the other hand, there are groups that are as well anti, but they are supporting the immigrants. So they try to show support and show sympathy to them. So thank you very much.
So Ben, I'm going to just hand it over to you to moderate our question and answer for Dorit, and then segue into your presentation.
Thank you. Dorit, a follow-up question. A couple of works we've already seen leverage collage, either in a historical way or a contemporary way. Is there a particular view or idea that collage brings to this work? It seems like there would be that with all the different voices you're trying to bring together, but is there something else you'd put into your own words to describe why collage is a good use for this particular work?
Yeah, so usually I'm not really using collage, just if I need to really point something. So thank you for this good question. So basically the map was open on my table, and I was just watching to it, and every time I felt something connected to it, I just went to this map and started painting on it, or ripped some papers off from the catalog. Like you can see the hand here is part of the catalog. I cannot point it, but and then a photograph I took, I just printed very, very cheap print actually, and cut it with my hands and put it in several places and got on it markers. So this was a process of reaction for many incidents and influenced by reading or the symposium that I was listening to, that made me every time put something else there. I just want to mention this little pig on the left side. This is representing actually my town, Haifa, and is a very smiley pig because, you know, it's also the part of me that doesn't want to insult people by telling that they are animals, because our animals are better than people many times. They're not insulting. So I wanted to put this nice little pig from Haifa that we have a lot of them in the city.
And thinking about your experience at the sessions and looking at the artworks, I'm zooming in from Pittsburgh, so I'm very far away from the events. The only thing that I see are the reports that reach me and the people who are involved in this presentation today, sharing their thoughts. Is there something I'm missing in your experience that hasn't been reported in, let's say, the Jewish papers or the English papers that you and your experience you found surprising or important to share?
Well, I have a whole thing about the symposium that was just a little bit after. So there were very interesting opinions about it. Nothing was too surprising, not surprising too much, because, you know, the opinions are. What my surprise was that one Grupa, the director curatorial team, and Documenta committee as well, didn't take the rope and really create dialogue. I think that was the moment, especially when the idea of this Documenta was collectivity and community and solidarity. They would invite artists, Israelis, there are many in Germany, and Jewish from the community, to create together, maybe an artistic dialogue and maybe just a debate. But there was nothing like that, even though on this symposium they invited, but nothing happened so far. And this is upsetting, because it really creates a feeling that it's only one-sided, and the press and the media is taking sides, depends who they're coming from and where and why. So, yeah.
Thank you. And just to share, there have been lovely comments about the work, appreciating what people see in it and what you said about it. So it was wonderful.
Thank you.
Oh, one question. Why do you separate concerns of Israelis and those of Jews? I'm assuming there's a gap between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the question.
Yeah,
Or do you?
So anti-Semitic is mostly referred to Jewish. I'm Jewish by default, but my identity is Israeli, and Israel is another thing. So now there is anti-Semitism is one thing, but the BDS or against the Israeli occupation is something else, which I am actually very understanding this and feel the same about it. But the way that I felt there about this was very hurting, because I believe that you need to know a person first, who he is and what they think, before you put stamps saying that not all of us bad. I guess there are different people everywhere, and we need to give a chance to talk about things. And even if there are misunderstandings and we don't think the same, we should talk. Because
do you think there's a chance for such a discussion that you're hoping for to happen around Documenta now, or do you think it's going to have to be some other time?
So Documenta is 100 days and there's still time. And if somebody from Documenta, because I invited actually people from Documenta, I don't know if they're here, but if there is someone, I'm just raising my request to create some dialogue and not leaving it like this, because it's not okay. And I've been there and I visited the Palestinian exhibit, and it was great exhibit, very strong, very powerful. Not something we don't see here in Israel. Actually, here we have a lot of freedom of creative practice. There are a lot of artists that are from all sides of the political map in Israel, and we have the freedom to express ourselves. You can see this in the major museums and in the small museums, in galleries, in the papers, and it's fine. We can talk about it. We can argue about it, but it's not forbidden. And the things that I saw at the Palestinian exhibit was things that we saw here. We see it here. I mean, there was nothing wrong about it to show it there, and it was nothing against. So I think there was a good time for Documenta to invite some artists together with other artists that are there, Palestinians, Germans, Indonesians, just together talk about it in a very artistic way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ben, would you like to proceed to your presentation now?
I take a different approach to anti-Semitism in my work, and it's more of an approach to support the fighters, as they say, those who make work directly related to the issue, like what we just saw in other work. I hope to make work that bolsters the artists and others who defend Judaism, who defend Israel, and work to argue against anti-Semitism. And the way that I do that is to look at Jewish texts and Jewish traditions, not to make work that's educational about them, but to move that material into culture. I hope that it enters the art world. I hope that it enters. Here I've been working on comic books. I'm more well known for a series of paintings of Arab maps, taking a Jewish idea and presenting them in abstract, minimal form. But here I've jumped into comic books instead, to show some stories in a way that is hopefully appealing, but also in a way that they're not usually shown. And this comic book is based on Abraham and Isaac, the binding of Isaac. And I often like to take the traditional text and change it with pictures rather than changing the words. And so the text I'm turning to here is Et Sharei Ratzon, which is a Sephardi liturgical poem that's read during Rosh Hashanah and near the shofar service. In this poem, Abraham binds Isaac, and the refrain is the binder, bound, and an altar, but I've changed it to, for a little bit of the English sound, binder, bound, and pyre. And it refers to Abraham, the binder, Isaac, the bound, and then pyre, the sacrifice. And in the poem, the voice of Isaac takes center stage, where he turns to his father and says, "Do it, Dad, do it. Tighten the bonds, sharpen the knife. Make sure your sacrifice and my sacrifice is accepted by the divine." And it's a gut-wrenching moment. So if you'd please turn to the next image, I'll look at a page. While Isaac is turning to his father, he laments his mother and says, as the words on the page here say, "Where shall I find for her a consoler? Oh, where, I beseech, it pains me for my mother to cry and sob." So he's thinking of his mother, Sarah, as this is happening. The bottom of the page, I compound different interpretations. And another interpretation thinks that Sarah dies while Abraham and Isaac are away, that an evil spirit or even the Satan comes to her and tells her what's happening, and she dies in sorrow. So at the bottom, that shadowy figure is visiting her in the tent as these events unfold, as we hear Isaac's voice lamenting her. Who's going to console her? Next page, please. And then finally, we return to Abraham, who has the knife in his hand, and Isaac is saying, "Please sharpen it, Father, and my bonds tighten. And when my flesh is burned, take with you that which remains of my ashes, and say to Sarah, this is Isaac's perfume." So in this picture at the bottom, that shadowy figure is speaking that phrase, "This is Isaac's perfume," as she responds in horror. But just before that, I imagine, what is it that Abraham would see as he's going through this moment? He would see his grown son speaking to him. He might see his grown son in the second panel as a sacrifice, as a sheep. And then finally at the bottom or in the middle, seeing the son that was a baby flashing through his eyes as this child is telling him, do the deed. And so I find the poem, the liturgical poem, very powerful. And I hope that I present it in a way that sort of uses a contemporary idiom to bring it out of the synagogue, out of the classroom, out of Jewish education into a cultural space that those who fight anti-Semitism can appreciate and then sort of use that as psychic, religious, spiritual strength as they push these arguments forward.
And this work is so powerful. And I don't think I'm the first person to point this out, but I just want to comment that the layout of a comic book page is so perfect for Talmudic, different versions of Talmudic interpretation. And you just encapsulated that perfectly. And the image of Isaac as a baby flashing, you really got into the psychology of the Akedah. It's masterful. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you for presenting that.
Thank you. I do find that scriptural and Talmudic texts, as everyone describes them, as being very terse. There's a lot packed into few words. Each word can be a picture. And then it's the comic book that maybe fills in the pictures between the sentences. So I'm finding it very useful. So I appreciate that, Judith. Thank you.
Fantastic. I think we can open this up now for our panelists. And I'm going to go back to Chana's image. And Ben, I'll toss it back to you.
All right, thank you. Chana, thank you for sharing this work. I enjoyed hearing about it just a moment ago. And in relationship to the larger topic of arts and anti-Semitism, the work, The People's Justice That Was Taken Down, was originally created for a particular audience, but it was moved to a new audience at Documenta. And when you put a work in a different context, its meaning might change and what people see in it might shift. What do you think this move and responses to it, from perhaps its original position to the position in Documenta, tells us about the different audiences' understanding of anti-Semitism?
Sure. Well, first, I want to just thank you. I'm very happy to be here today and to be having this discussion. Having looked at the work and a lot at the background of Documenta itself and the inception of the art festival or art exhibit, I think that what really struck me is I think that there was a bit of, giving up a rejection of dialogue in favor of, this thought that everything that's anti-Semitic or deemed anti-Semitic needs to be covered. And so I think it was really misguided what ended up happening, because really it was a rejection of dialogue disguised as a rejection of anti-Semitism. And I think it's very unfortunate. As you said, this work was seen in the public realm internationally since, I believe it was 2002. And these images had never been pointed out previously. Clearly, when you have a particular visual vocabulary, which is, I think, what we're dealing with, this very particular vocabulary that the West is familiar with, but that perhaps in other cultures and other societies, and specifically in the society of Suharto, who was in power until 1998 and used Nazi imagery to convey a sense of heroism, while leaving aside all of the issues of the Holocaust itself and of all of the negatives that came out of that, and the destruction of European Jewry. The images of Nazi Germany were hailed as being ones of greatness, of military superiority. And so I think when Documenta invited Rangrupa to install this collective, and to have this collective vision, they invited in a whole visual vocabulary from another culture, and then chose to ignore the dissonance between the Western visual vocabulary and that of this Indonesian group. And I think that is where really the conflict lies. And I think that it's very unfortunate and ironic at the same time that that German culture and Germany in general really can't have this discussion because of some of the laws that they have. For instance, Dorit's piece could not be exhibited in Germany simply because of some of the symbols that are in her piece. And so I think there's a real disconnect, and it makes it very difficult to engage in dialogue when certain things are not allowed to be seen.
Thank you. Thank you. Dorene, I mentioned I'm in Pittsburgh. Lots of people are all over the world as we speak with each other and learn from each other today. But speaking from your experience and where you are, how do you think this controversy about people's justice, removing the work, et cetera, might have been handled if Documenta was in the United States, say New York, Chicago, or Los Angeles? We can't hear you. You're muted. Thank
There,
you.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
I don't know if you could see the piece that I'm holding up, but I was not one of the Mouseketeers. I just want to correct that. I was not one of the Mouseketeers. I used that. The piece that you have opens up, and there are about 10 pages of diary, including the passport from Felix Nussbaum and Degenerate Art, and superimpositions of 44 Dumb and swastikas. And it opens up into my family's history, which is why I use Dorene from the Mouseketeers. But getting back to your question, what is happening in the United States at this point, it has changed. I grew up as the first generation in America. My father was from Poland. He got out right before the rest of the family was wiped out. 120 people in one family, and the rest went to Auschwitz. And he fought in World War II, was very concerned about raising my brothers and I in America, covering our identity when we went out onto the streets. So they named me a nice Anglo-Saxon name, Dorene Lee, for my protection. But that protection didn't work for me. When I went to ballet school and my Magen David, my Jewish star, fell out of my leotard, suddenly I had no friends. When I went to teach in Plainfield, New Jersey, Farrakhan country at the time, I saw what the frightening anti-Semitism could bring. And worst was when I started teaching in a high school and a student said to me that I should go back to Auschwitz. I didn't learn my lesson. But because I came from a family of fighters, I decided to go back to school and get yet another master's. This time, the master's was in teaching the Holocaust. And I wrote a program called Portraits of Survivors. So what ended up happening with that program was that there's a student, you have the artwork of that student. If you want to show it, you want to split the screen? Yes, that's it. The student was an honors student, proficient in Russian and well-liked. He was also a wrestler. He weighed, they told me, 300 pounds. He was 6'4". You can see in the image that he drew here when they were learning to do drawing on the right side of the brain, the hand. They were supposed to draw the hand in either the first initial or last initial sign language. This is what he chose. And when I saw that, I started getting more and more frightened. And then I was told, and actually there's a number 38 on this that Judith Joseph had told me means proud blood. This student ended up being the one who was carving swastikas every day in the drafting tables. And even though he was so helpful and respectful, he actually wanted to join an army to fight against the United States. He eventually was arrested. And it was the most frightening thing to me, being that he was such a big, powerfully well-liked student. My point with all of this now is that things have changed in the United States. Moss, the book that I always used in teaching, is being banned by some local and school districts throughout the United States. The Diary of Anne Frank also. So things have changed. After January 6th, the United States found out that they can't give as much freedom of expression. I'm all for freedom of expression. What I'm not for is when that freedom of expression is used to promote hate and violence. And that's where I see the images in Germany that were used by Ron Gruppe. We're going. It's okay to express, and we should be allowed to express all the pain and suffering that all the different nationalities have gone through. That's what music and writing and drama and art should be. But I don't think that we should be allowed to promote hate and violence through our artwork.
Well, you certainly bring up a very difficult and eternal question between promoting ideas and self-expression when these things go counter to a society or the rules of a place. It's a very challenging thing, and that the student artworks and your experience of who that person became and what they did is also a telling, powerful narration.
It was shocking.
What you look for, yes, quite shocking.
I didn't know, I didn't expect it, because maybe being raised with ethnocentric values, I thought someone mean and bad was going to be the one who said and did anti-Semitic things.
Sure.
Be the nicest person. And there was always that undercurrent that I felt when teaching. When asked to please decorate the Christmas tree, you could hang green bagels. That kind of commentary.
Right.
That was not meant to hurt.
Sure. To make sure we hear from everyone, I'd like to look at Selena's, turn to Selena and ask a related question about what it means to remove or to silence artistic expression, and say, the Documenta decided to remove the offending artwork, the People's Justice. What did they hope to achieve by doing that? Was it an attempt to just silence the controversy and move on, or something else? And did they achieve their goal by having it removed?
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here and have this discussion and dialogue, which I think is of utmost importance. I do think that the Documenta just ended up silencing or wanting to silence all the discussion, which is the most important part of what we want to promote, discussion and education. The pieces that were removed are blatantly anti-Semitic, blatantly, to me, anti-Israel, which they do have a connection in at least one way or some ways. But what did not happen by the Documenta was an overall evaluation of the Documenta. I read at least one article that was published in the Washington Post by a gentleman and his wife that went to the Documenta, and their experience of the overall exhibit, what it was that it was a far left-wing expression without a balance, without an overall, I would say an overall evaluation by the Documenta of what are we presenting, who are we presenting, and what impact are we having on the world. And the Documenta impact on the world, especially the artistic world, is monumental. So I don't think that what the Documenta did was particularly impactful. I think it was all that they could do at that point to say we did something. But like Dorit and Chana pointed out, what's most important is, okay, well, what's next? The director apparently quit, but then it really turned out that she was fired. But the person that took over didn't really do much to prolong the dialogue. What has the government done? I did a little bit of research of what's been going on in the past 6 months in Germany. A week before the Documenta started, a piece of art that was blatantly anti-Semitic was decided by the highest court in Germany that it was not anti-Semitic and didn't have to be removed from public display. So what are we really achieving here? What we really want to achieve is education. What we really want to achieve is for us to be able to say, this is anti-Semitic, but what's the root of the problem and how are we going to get rid of it? One thing I wanted to add related to the last question you asked, Ben, is where we come from makes a very big difference. My family comes from Iraq and Iran, fully Jewish. We were exiled twice, out of Iraq and then out of Iran. We ended up in the United States. And in both Iran and Iraq, there is so much, hate, and there is so much censorship that the culture is completely lost. So it is certainly a balance, but the balance also has to include the most important part, which is what we're having right now, the discussion, the education. And I think that's what the Documenta should have done. They still have a little bit of time till the, almost the end of September to do something meaningful. Whether they're going to do it or not, I'm not sure. I haven't seen any, basically from what I'm reading, it's really the media. I haven't seen any real spark to change anything. And then what's going to happen at the next Documenta? That's the most important thing. Right. What's going to happen moving forward? What's going to happen to the People's Justice? Is it going to hang up again at another exhibit? Right. And what's the discussion going to be about that? And so you bring up some interesting questions about censorship or what kinds of things are allowed to be said in different places. So the laws in Germany about what kind of images can be presented seem to be a different experience than your own, coming from Iran and Iraq, and the different kinds of things that are allowed or permitted in that place. And that brings up a couple of ideas that have been floating in the chat about institutions and what institutions are responsible for. Is it simply the money that's coming in and they do what the money givers suggest? Or does a museum or art organization have a responsibility toward dialogue, which we seem to be commenting on a bunch this afternoon? Any comments about the institutional side of these conversations from the panelists? Are you asking me or the group? Anyone who wishes on the panel. I'll just add real quick. I think that the institution has the utmost responsibility to oversee and to not just continue, but start the necessary dialogue to promote love, peace, not hate, understanding, and acceptance. What happened before the Documenta started? There were certainly stirrings already There were already questions of what the Documenta will present. Nobody went through the 1,500 artists that were being presented either on an individual basis or as an overview of the whole Documenta to say, do we have a problem here? Do we need to talk about anything here? An interesting concept was that the People's Justice was first covered up and then taken down. What if before the Documenta, the People's Justice had been covered up? And people were like, what happened here? What's the problem? And there was a discussion of, there is a problem. There's a global problem that's been going on for generations, and it's not just in Germany.
Sure. Dorene, Chana, either of you have a response to the institutional question behind these issues?
I do. I have a question because it seems that the work was submitted in 2018, and they had plenty of time to view all the pieces. The piece in question went up the day before the exhibit. The idea that there are iconic anti-Semitic images in that piece that were overlooked is somehow, maybe I'm innocent here, but hard to believe. Hard to believe that it was overlooked. And then it was rehung. Some of the images were rehung after they were taken down. So something is going on, and it's not complete naivety here. They do know what they're doing. And as you had mentioned, what's the future? Is it going to be more and more of the left ruling it without giving equal time to everyone to express? And are images like that going to be allowed in the future?
Well, and I would like to add that, you know, Germany has, I was in Germany in 1993, actually with Jewish Federation on the first young leadership, the first young leadership trip to Germany after the war fell, after the wall fell. And so we had the opportunity to meet with the Jewish community, leaders in the Jewish community, leaders in the German government, in the reunification of the two Germanys. And what I find really striking is, you know, there are so many boundaries that the German government has placed for obvious reasons, because of their particular history. There was such a rejection of those boundaries in the 1990s, as there started to be an influx of Turkish and Algerian immigrants, a really large influx into Germany, and they started to have problems with right-wing fascism and the rise of right-wing fascism. And I think it's something that Germany just still has not reckoned with. You know, there is a rejection at this point, I think, by the younger generations of wanting to even deal with this anymore. They're done with the Holocaust. They've moved on. And I think that in some ways that might be a reason for that covering and uncovering, and the ambivalence about whether these images were truly anti-Semitic or not, given that they were coming from another culture and had been appropriated, co-opted by another culture for a wholly different purpose. And I think I did see in the comments that somebody brought up that issue of cultural appropriation of imagery. And to that, I would like to add as well that when I was in graduate school in the 1990s and began to make images that incorporated Holocaust imagery and ideas of other, I was roundly condemned or really questioned. Like perhaps that would be better. I was really, really pressed as to whether I even owned the rights to be able to approach that subject as a Jew who was born in America after the war. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I think it's an interesting question, but back to the issue that Ben had brought up in terms of the, you know, the country and the institutions having an obligation. I do think that there was an abrogation of responsibility here by the Documenta directors, because as it's been pointed out, these images were submitted much earlier. There was this whole notion of inviting a collective that stood for, at its very base, this idea of incorporating, it's like I think it was described as a pyramid scheme in a sense, right? Like incorporating so many artists and so many ideas that really what you're ending up with is a completely different cultural reckoning. And if the Documenta directors were not willing to engage and explore what might come up with that, then I think they abrogated their responsibility in what Documenta was meant for, which was really to promote ideas of cultural exchange, but also of democracy. And that, that charge that Documenta had from its inception of promoting this new German democracy, really was not at all thought about in this year's Documenta.
This conversation reminds me of a show at the Jewish Museum in Pittsburgh some time ago that incorporated Nazi imagery. Artists were responding to the vocabulary of the era. And so things such as, a Lego set involving a concentration camp and such. And it was powerful enough for me that I remember it. But in that case, in New York at the time, that kind of work could be shown to criticism or applause, but couldn't be shown in Germany. And so one of the other questions here is, if a work uses imagery that's illegal, so to speak, but to critique the ideas behind it, in America, that would be permitted, as we've seen in different places, but perhaps in Germany or in other places, it may be illegal, but maybe impossible, that the image wouldn't be seen as a critique. It would just be seen as an image with that vocabulary. So even if those works came into Documenta, I'm not sure how they would be read. So it's a question, sort of open, more rhetorical than anything else, how these images, how a symbol or an idea can be critiqued visually and then misunderstood. In the People's Justice, I'm not saying they were using these images as a critique. It seemed as if they were speaking with these words from their mouths. And following up, the Documenta work also seemed to critique things beyond, or it included anti-Semitic imagery, but it was also critiquing militarism. It was critiquing broader questions. And we focus on a particular kind of question, anti-Semitism. And I think it's appropriate that the institutions that were critiquing it in Germany, they're very good at that focus. But if there are other views about what else the work was also saying, tying anti-Semitism to these other bigger notions, that can go under the radar. I'm looking through the chat to see if there are other general thoughts and questions. Does the panel have questions for each other at this moment?
Just want to say that, first of all, the piece by Terry Buddy, People Justice, was created very, very long time ago as a result of the oppression there of Sahuto. Sahuto is this name of the leader, I think, the dictator that was there. And the other question is about censorizing this art exhibit. I mean, it's also not okay. Where is the point? Where is the middle? So a dialogue and talking about the art that is controversial is important, but also not excluding any group and not excluding art without having a conversation. I believe that if he wasn't in the soil of Germany, he wasn't so harsh. He was more easy to adjust because of the loss of anti-Semitic in Germany. So, yeah.
I just wanted to jump in on that too. In the United States, it's a thorny problem, and I'm certainly no expert on free speech, but there's a definition of hate speech. And I think that's one way that the law gets around it. And it's similar to the idea of crying fire in a crowded theater. If your speech gives rise to acts of violence or foments hatred, then it's no longer protected. But on the screen right now, we have an image that Archie Rand, a Jewish member of the Jewish Art Salon, created, which uses an anti-Semitic visual trope. So if a Jew presents it, or if an African American uses the N-word, or and then you get into a whole other thing. But I feel like images are powerful, and I think the intent is important, and the result is important, and beyond that, it's challenging to distinguish.
I would like to add something that most of us have grown up in a world, especially the art world, where we went to the Museum of Modern Art and saw Guernica, which was obviously a very powerful graphic interpretation of war. And it was allowed. Why? Because there's no image in it that is pushing, as you just said, hatred and violence. I mean, some of us are the children of parents who danced the Lindy to Elvis Presley, and Elvis pelvis was not allowed on Ed Sullivan. There was censorship. We grew up with that, even if we went to Woodstock. The world has changed now, and the sensitivity, because of the advent of the computer, making the world more of a smaller world. We have the news constantly, and we see what's going on with the rapid rise of anti-Semitism in the world. So those images that might have been allowed before are no longer acceptable. It's a world that is being educated, and I hope that through the dialogue that we have here, that education, that sharing would continue, so that we will continue, and maybe there will be another Documenta that will correct this one.
Shoshana makes a comment that an image can be, a problematic image can be shown in the right context, say a history book or a class, but on the street or a t-shirt is a different story. So the context adds meaning to the image.
I'd like to point out that while I agree, with some of what was just said, Guernica was not met with applause when it was first shown, and in fact was roundly criticized as just being sort of this Mod Podge chaotic picture of body parts, and I think that much of that critique was not obviously about the drawing of the image as much so as about it being a political image by a very powerful and well-known artist.
Yeah, and it was possibly shocking at the time, but we grew up with it, and it was in the Museum of Modern Art for 42 years. So that kind of imagery was allowed. What was done by one Gruppe in Germany was blatantly iconic anti-Semitic imagery. And maybe they're not aware that that's the way the rest of the Western world looks at it. So there's the educational part of this, that there could be more sharing. I would like to hear more about what happened in Indonesia. They implicated the Mossad. I would like to hear more about that. I'm open to hearing it. But again, if it's going to be imagery that provokes hatred and violence, there can't be an agreement in the artistic community that we're going to let that continue, because that leads to what we all know would be a Holocaust. And it's not just, I mean, I don't want to use the word the Holocaust for everybody else. There are genocides throughout the world going on right now. I want to be respectful of other people's rights, but there should be a sensitivity through education that we can't use any image that we feel like it. Guernica was onto itself, and it's accepted. it's not considered anti-Semitic or provoking violence.
Sure.
I have a question. May I ask it? I have a question of Dorit. I don't know much about how many Israeli artists tried to become part of Documenta 15 or in the past. Do you know anything about, like, statistically, what has happened with Israeli and Jewish artists trying to be part of this, the Documenta? Because I'm thinking, how can we make sure that the next Documenta is different, just as one form of exhibiting?
As far as I know, Documenta is only by invitation by the curator or the curatorial team, as now it is a curatorial team, but usually it's a curator. So it's by invitation. And I think maybe there were some here and there Israelis, but not as a group, not as a group exhibit. Usually Documenta doesn't have like the Venice Biennale or you know, booths of countries, so it doesn't work this way. So I don't know. I know that the Palestinians exhibit was specifically called the Palestinians Gallery of the exhibit, and they also had other areas that they exhibited, but it was not, I don't know about Israelis. I believe that here and there were Israelis, but not in this one.
Thank you.
Wondering what we do moving forward. I kind of feel that as an artist, I expect other artists to step up for people who are othered. And we are seeing in the United States, both in the left wing and the right wing, a lot of anti-Semitism. And I feel like we need to call out artists, because that's our tribe, as we see things that are unjust. And that's sort of the place where I'm standing. But I'm wondering what other people have to say about, you know, strategies or steps that can be taken for us here in the United States, and also others around the world, to deal with anti-Semitism, which seems to be rising.
I would add to that, Judith, and say that the art world, the place that we can look to is the supposed gatekeepers, the curators, the museums, and speak with them as well. The artists make the work, but then how is it seen? And so the Documenta example shows that it can be problematic, it can be a challenge, because we want to support free expression, but we also want to defend against certain ideas. And so how do we educate the curators and museums before the issue arises, as they select the work to be disseminated? And so bringing in the touring body, making the work where it was originally shown, has a voice and an idea, and then the curators being chosen for Documenta brings those ideas to a new place. And so it takes the institutional level to start these conversations before they become problematic. There are ways to share ideas we disagree with in a way that don't become the issue, right, so to speak. And that's the challenge.
I was wondering, there have been a lot of comments in the chat. Is there a way we can maybe address some of those?
Sure, I'll read through a few of them quickly, and I'll let the panelists respond as they wish. There are some comments regarding censorship in the United States about particular books, and that can be compared to censorship elsewhere. There is some ideas about anti-Semitism is something that we're discussing, but what happens when the issue turns to other concerns, let's say of racism, and what kinds of speech can be shown or not shown, and in what way. There's an irony of that Documenta was a place, as was mentioned, that the democratic view of art was going to be shared, but here we are discussing an example where an idea was removed. Another comment I'll just read directly. Anti-Semitism is largely a conspiracy theory by some. So even when we confront anti-Semitism, we're told we have too much power. Another comment I'll read. In Germany, they know that, quote, stupid or uneducated people can have influence. They do not want that to happen again. So an ironic use of a symbol like a swastika is also not allowed. Are Jews alone the people who call out anti-Semitism? Who can we reach out to build an understanding of what we're discussing? The German government is an ally. They strongly condemn anti-Semitism, and that's good to know. Artists themselves can perform Tenderenskunst, even if it means a separate body of work from their usual work. I mean, having two parallel bodies of work about different things. Samantha Baskind's book describes how some artists had Jewish work and then mainstream work. Comments or thoughts from those comments from the panelists?
Well, I will start. I would like to just raise the issue that has not yet been raised, which is that there were other racial minorities who were also characterized in that piece that was presented and covered up. So there was a Black, an African-American soldier depicted in that image as well, who was masturbating and ejaculating, and none of us are saying anything about that. And I find that in and of itself to be a little bit problematic. Even though I know we're discussing anti-Semitism, we were also discussing racism in art. And so I would put out to the group, well, you know, why are we not looking at that as well in this piece? Because we are talking about a piece from Indonesia. So where does that imagery fit in? And, you know, and what needs to be said about that as well.
I wanted to bring up a point also. I agree with what you just said. I didn't know, but the definition of anti-Semitism itself, if we were to say from now on, there should be no anti-Semitic imagery, we cannot come up with in the world an agreement on the definition for anti-Semitism. Deborah Lipstadt I worked with, and she came up with the anti-Semitism definition that was agreed upon, and it was added to. And the minute they brought the addition to it, bringing in Israel, that was the end. The international community was not in agreement any longer. And it should be also mentioned that the predominantly all the artists who submitted their work are supporters of BDS, according to some of the articles that I have read in Germany, which is a biggie. So how do you deal with people who are, you know, anti-Israel?
You don't.
I
It's
think
like fighting a war.
Selena?
Yeah,
I
well,
think
sorry.
it's
Yeah,
okay. I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I live in Berlin, so I'm also looking for galleries, etc. Now, I couldn't do that very well because there was COVID before and everything was closed. But although officially the country, the government is very anti-Semitic, you still walk into certain walls. And especially with the left wing, it's very difficult because they say, no, we're not anti-Semitic, we're just anti-Israel. It's a battle, in my opinion, which is very hard to win.
Thank you.
Right. I just wanted to comment that what we're experiencing today, I certainly am, is the most important result of any experience, which is the discussion, the exchange of ideas, and seeing the big picture. I personally didn't see enough of people's justice. I did see some images. Chana, thank you for pointing out that image. I didn't notice that. Whether I visually saw it or not, I'm not sure. But I did see, I think, soldiers from Russia depicted and maybe other ethnicities. And I did notice other ethnic depictions, whether they were, racist or not. It depends on how we discuss them, which we're not today. But we got to learn so much from Dorit and from each of you about what the Documenta is all about. I didn't know that the group that was picked to curate the event was really in charge of everything. Whether anyone from the government came in, stepped in and said, hey, what's going on? If they have anti-Semitic laws, which apparently they do to some degree, I would think that for a citywide exhibition, which represents the country and $50 million US goes into it, that some kind of discussion or overview would be had. So I'm really glad we're having this. And I think that's the most important part of it all.
So actually, just to follow up on what you were just saying, the German president responded by warning that there are limits to artistic freedom. That was his response to this controversy. The chancellor didn't attend. It was the first time in 30 years that the German chancellor has not attended Documenta. And of course, there was the resignation. So to me, again, I look at it as really an abrogation of responsibility for engaging in the dialogue that was necessary. And to even just to the extent of making a statement that there are limits to artistic freedom, well, then have a dialogue about that.
Yes.
But to just put that out there, and then on the other hand, I say, well, artists who choose, and it is a choice, to be included in a government-funded, any kind of government-funded exhibit has to know that there are boundaries and there are limits, and you have to always know where your funding is coming from, I think, as an artist.
They were given $3.1 million, and I heard that it's going to be rescinded in the future. The government does not want to support, and Germany is a lot more, even though they had incidents, more anti-Semitic incidents than the United States, which was pretty high last year. I think United States was like 2,700 and Germany clocked in at 3,200. But they are much more demanding because of their past, I suppose,
Right.
to protect.
I think that one good thing that came out of this is that the scandal that arose from this image, this group of images, really gave Documenta a black eye. And I think that organizers of exhibitions are going to pay attention to that, because they have to take a look at what's being shown. They can't just, kind of carte blanche. So maybe that's a positive outcome, is that because people objected and because, well, Jewish people raised their voices, among others. So being vigilant and keeping an eye on things is a good thing. Keeps people, it holds people accountable. There is never going to be a perfect standard, right, for what is hate speech, how far do you go to limit free expression. But as everybody's been saying, especially Chana, the dialogue is important. So I think we've covered this pretty well. Ben, I'll just give it back to you to kind of wrap up our conversation, unless anybody, Yona, if you have anything to add, or Dorit.
One thing.
Go ahead.
I just want to say that freedom of speech or freedom of expression doesn't have to insult anything. You can do it in a way that is not insulting other group. So practicing freedom of creative practice is crucial to learn how to do it without insulting other groups. That's my 2 cents of that.
That's great.
I love
Thank
that.
you very much.
Yeah, it's a great standard.
Before we give it to Ben to close this, I just wanted to make a quick announcement, which is that September 15, the Jewish Art Salon will be participating in an exhibition in Washington, D.C. called Samaritans, a Biblical People. It's a large historical exhibition, and the Jewish Art Salon's contribution is called Contemporary Jewish Artists Encounter Samaritan Culture. The exhibition will be up until January 1st. If you're in the neighborhood, please go by. Of course, we will put this on our website and social media in the week to come, but I just wanted to let you know about it. I wanted to very much thank everybody for attending and participating. Ben, giving it back to you for the closing words.
Thank you, Yona. I came into this with certain ideas and I'm leaving with many more. So I very much enjoyed moderating the conversation, hearing from all of you and sharing your thoughts with each other. As we say, and as it's already been shared, conversation is great and the learning together is really tremendous. So I hope that perhaps some new relationships are formed even behind the scenes through a chat, however it goes, and this conversation can continue. And thanks to Yona and to everyone else who organized the panel and to the Jewish Art Salon. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for attending.
Thank you very much, Ben. And
Thank you. This was so wonderful to be part of.
Thank you so much.